Welcome back. So, across the pond in the good old US of A, they've certainly taken a shine to some of our brilliant British telly over the years, haven't they? But while some adaptations have been absolute smash hits, like The Office, there are others that, well, let's just say, didn't quite capture the same magic. Today we're diving into the story of three more British sitcoms that made the leap to American screens with big expectations only to spectacularly flop. Now we are approaching the UK's highest placed British sitcoms of all time, with The Vicar of Dibley at number 9 on the ranker.com website. The first episode sets the comic clash of characters that will last until almost the end of the 17-year run of the show. Geraldine is a female vicar, and the views of her new parishioners range from keen to confused to earnestly in opposition. In 2006, the Fox network decided to make their version of the sitcom. The pilot was made in cooperation with Tiger Aspect, the company behind the original show. The script was written by Suzanne Martin, who would later write for Will and Grace. Richard Curtis was on the team as an executive producer. Andrew Zine, commercial director of Tiger Aspect Productions, which made the original series, said, "In the US they were probably located in a cosy community faced with the arrival of a new religious leader." Well, Dibley was quite cosy despite some of the population being decidedly weird. Inevitably there were going to be some changes. One of the changes was necessary because the introduction of a female vicar would not be an issue in America, where the relatively younger churches did not have the experience of hundreds of years of tradition with only men as church leaders. So instead, the new minister was a former resident returning to the town and clashing with the traditional values of the locals and their dislike for her wild child past. Kirstie Alley was chosen for the part of the Geraldine role. She did fit the wild child personality, but was far more glamorous compared to attractive and homely Dawn French. Of course, another change was the name of the show, which does seem reasonable. Dibley does not sound like an American town, and the inclusion of divine fitted the ecclesiastical theme and juxtaposed the new minister's misspent past. Of course, to confuse the expectation of the church council, they are told the new minister is called Sydney. The other regulars are there with suitably Americanised names and mostly recognisable from their appearance. Jim is a much younger JD but keeps his negatively confusing stutter, and Frank is a younger black man called Fred. He does not seem as fastidious as his British counterpart when it comes to the minutes of the meetings. Even the sets are very similar, and the joke between the minister and her assistant at the end of the show is retained. They even used a similar helicopter shot of the countryside for the opening titles as the original. The pilot was a mashup of the first episode when the new minister arrives and the storm episode when the church window is damaged. It's actually not bad, not the worst pilot episode I've ever seen. Fox executives were not impressed. A series was not commissioned, and that was the end of the story. The 7th best British sitcom of all time is set in Slade Prison, where Norman Stanley Fletcher is doing porridge. Fletcher is a quick-witted convict who's always one step ahead of the guards. Trading barbs with vindictive wardens and navigating life amongst the criminals was one of Ronnie Barker's standout roles. In 1974, Dick Clement and Ian La Frenais received an offer from the ABC network in America to write and co-produce a reworking of Porridge. The pair set off for America, where they visited a number of prisons to get an idea of prison life in the US. The title clearly needed a change. The British euphemism "doing porridge" was not part of the American vernacular. It was set in the fictional Alameda Minimum Security Prison in California. While Clement and La Frenais were in the US, Ronnie Barker was free to star in Open All Hours. In On the Rocks, the Fletcher role was Puerto Rican criminal Hector Fuentes, played by Jose Perez. Fletcher's original disdain for the warders and the penal system were transposed to Fuentes' anger over the Watergate scandal and a mistrust of the Washington political elites. Making a prison-based sitcom was bound to be problematic. There was criticism from the US National Association for Justice, who were worried the show might paint a too rosy picture of prison life. But after overcoming that obstacle, Clement and LaFrenne, along with John Rich, the US producer of On the Rocks, were becoming increasingly unhappy about the compromises they had to make for ABC. They took the edge off the series by insisting it be family friendly and hip. Consequently, the show lost any gritty realism. Some of the storylines were directly transposed from the British show, with the debut episode reprising the first day in prison setup from the original show. The series featured much more location shooting than its British counterpart. LaFrenne said, "We went to a real hardcore prison called Chino and spent 5 days filming inside maximum security. Dick and I had prison blues on. We were extras. I don't know how we weren't all taken hostage, wandering around pretending we were inmates. I can't believe we did it." The sitcom aired 24 episodes on ABC from September 1975 to May 1976. It was originally shown as part of a double bill with cop show Barney Miller that was claimed to be one of the funniest police shows ever. ABC promoted the two shows with the tagline, "Funny cops and funny robbers." Dick Clement admitted, "We didn't have fun doing it, it was a grind." Both writers felt the show just wasn't working. They knew that essentially prison wasn't funny. It probably owes a lot to Ronnie Barker's popularity and talent that Porridge worked in the UK. "American prison is particularly not funny," said Dick, "because inevitably race comes into it. In Britain, class can always be funny, but if you start getting into class in America, you reach race before very long and suddenly everybody's prickly and sensitive and nervous because it's a difficult subject." When executives at ABC asked them to do a second series, they said no. "I think we must be in the American TV history books as the only writers to turn down a second series," said Ian. The reaction to the series was mixed. Some viewers thought it was hilarious, but others felt that Jose Perez was wooden and delivered his lines like he was reading from cue cards. From what I've seen of it, they were right, but I was at a disadvantage as the recording is such poor quality. This would also turn out to be the end of Porridge. The writers had now made America their home and they wrote the third and final series of Porridge in Beverly Hills. Ronnie Barker said, "I didn't want to get stuck with being identified as one character." On the Rocks was apparently available on DVD, but the company has gone bust. Several DVD distributors are offering a disc of 3 or 4 episodes, but these seem to be likely to be off-air recordings. 2 episodes are kept at the Paley Center for Media in New York, and the same episodes also exist at the UCLA Film and Television Archive in Los Angeles. Two Lovable Rogues were voted as the second best ever British sitcom. Known as Del Boy and Rodney, they are the two dodgy street traders who sold counterfeit merchandise to eventually and accidentally become millionaires in Only Fools and Horses. The original show really ended in 1991, but the popularity of Only Fools resulted in Christmas specials aired between 1992 to 2003. In 2010, the star of the American version of The Office, Steve Carell, said that he would love to remake Only Fools and Horses for a US audience. Somewhat selfishly, he pictured himself in the role of Del Boy. The Sun quoted him saying, "That would be my dream role. The British do sitcoms better than anybody else in the world." He also called for Ricky Gervais, Paul Rudd, Vince Vaughn and Ben Stiller to get involved in the project. "I think with the right script writers and cast we could do Only Fools and Horses justice. If anybody wants to help me do a remake, I'd love it, with Ricky as Mike the barman." But nothing further was heard. Only Fools and Horses creator John Sullivan died in 2011. Had the project gone ahead, he would have at least been spared the indignity of seeing his show sabotaged. In January 2012, there were reports that an American version of the show was being made for ABC. Paul Lee, president of ABC, was a fan of the original and had the concept reworked in the hope that it would catch on and recapture the magic. Stephen Cragg and Brian Bradley, writers and producers of Happy Endings and Scrubs, were engaged to adapt the classic sitcom. Interviewed when news of the pilot was announced, David Jason said, "They can do brilliant comedy, but I don't see that they can bring off Fools and Horses," he explained. "It might work, but you've got to change so much that in the change, in order to Americanise it, do you lose the whole concept of the piece? The language will have to change so much, and there will be so many parts of the storyline you have to change." He referred to two very British idioms. "I have no idea what the American equivalent of plonker is, for example, or dipstick." The show's brand of humour and the Britishness of the characters' lifestyles would certainly be difficult to translate into any foreign market. The show's original title was based on the phrase "Only fools and horses work for a living," which has roots in older British slang that looks somewhat disparagingly at manual labour, suggesting there were easier ways to get rich. Del Boy certainly had many failed get-rich-quick schemes. This could reasonably have remained the title for the American audiences, but oddly quite a counter-intuitive title was chosen: Kings of Van Nuys. Van Nuys is a working-class neighbourhood of West Los Angeles with a diverse community. While the British Del Trotter no doubt considered himself king of his little empire, he and Rodney were definitely knaves. The 2012 pilot starred John Leguizamo, a stand-up comedian and voice actor, as Del. Not bad credentials, and he was dressed like our original in smart but tasteless clothes, and he spoke with an air of confidence. His younger brother Donnie, presumably nobody in America has ever been called Rodney, was played by comedian Dustin Ibarra. He was characterised as stupid, bordering on simple, and dressed in Goodwill shop rejects. Rodney's dress sense was unremarkable, and he was frequently conned by his own brother, but he wasn't stupid. He attended further education college. While the full pilot has never had an official public release in any form, in August 2023 it appeared on YouTube. The first pilot was not considered a success by ABC, but Paul Lee liked it enough to give it a second chance and provided the budget for another pilot. Just like the first pilot, it centred on the misadventures of two streetwise brothers and their ageing grandfather as they pursued get-rich-quick schemes in Van Nuys, California. Stephen Cragg and Brian Bradley, who wrote the first pilot, penned this new version as well. In fact, it was the same cast and crew. This second pilot was described as a retooled version. While the core concept and main cast remain the same, the script and potentially some of the elements of the characters or situations were likely revised. Despite this retooling and the second pilot being filmed in December 2012, ABC ultimately decided not to move forward with the series. As Steve O'Brien commented on the Digital Spy website, "No one wants a yank, only fools and horses, chaps." Well, the Americans tried to rework our religion and failed. They tried to tackle prison life and failed. They even failed to create the American dream from our story of work-shy slackers aiming for the high life. So, what other area of life can they fail in? Well, there is one more sitcom to come that was voted the best all-time British sitcom ever, and you can find out about it in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe for more about British TV sitcoms.